Hello everyone, Anarian here. This video is a little bit late. I made a bit of a mistake yesterday and had everything muted when I recorded this tour. So that didn't work out. But today we are doing a tour of my incomplete franchise zoo. And that's because taking up uh, the next project I wanted to work on was a sandbox zoo, and terraforming the map is taking a lot longer than I expected it to, which is fine. I'm still gonna eventually get that done, but since that is going to take some extra time, what I'm gonna do in the meantime is we're gonna do a tour of this zoo, and then I might do some Let's Play videos of the career mode, as I'm still working on clearing the hard mode version of all that, since when I cleared it the first time, the hard mode achievements weren't there. Uh, but in the meantime, we'll go ahead and start with this one. This is the first Starfleet Zoo, and it is, if it had a name, I guess it would be Starfleet Monterey. And it is essentially, for all intents and purposes, home as far as Planet Zoo is concerned. This is definitely the biggest and most fleshed out zoo that I have, and it also has, there are a few habitats here that kind of harken back to where I started in Planet Zoo rather than where I am now. So you'll be able to see probably a fair amount of progression as we go around this zoo, in terms of where I started when it comes to habitat construction and other things, and where I am now. Um, I've done a lot of remodeling over the years on this zoo. Not the years, over the last few months. Uh, I started the zoo back in 2019, so technically I guess it is years, but all of the remodeling has happened in the last 2 or 3 months, um, as well as a lot of expansion. So I have two, for now, completed continents. I guess we're getting the African back in about a week, which is which means that I won't have all the African animals in this zoo, but I probably won't for quite a while, because right now I am severely limited by my VRAM on this zoo. So right now, even with no guests in this zoo on play, I'm getting between 17 and 20 frames per second. So having to expand that further, or having to expand the zoo further, would cause some pretty severe issues. So I'm not going to do that in the foreseeable future until I have more VRAM and a system that can run the game a bit better. But that being said, let's go ahead and get started on the actual tour. We have just the standard entryway here, but I did switch to a nice wood board path for the Africa section. I tried to kind of do different paths for the various sections. This little hill here around the entrance is the result of the pathing system. When I redid the front, I put this water in here, and it wouldn't work without having some lifted up terrain here. So that's why why that looks that way. Um, I could probably figure out a way around it now, but back when I did that particular remodel, I could not. Um, so, yeah. That being said, we'll go ahead. We've got three directions we could go. We could go off to the left or the right or straight ahead. Um, and we're going to go ahead and go straight ahead to see some of the areas that I'm more proud of in the zoo first. We won't necessarily see all of the best areas first, but we'll see some of the nicer spots. Um, this area here is just kind of a nice little sitting area. It's not the best, it's not the worst. It is where the Aldabra giant tortoises used to be, but they've been moved, which makes them happier. And it also provides a nice little seating area near the first dining area in the zoo. Um, and this dining area used to be totally different too. Pretty much anything in this area of the zoo has been massively remodeled. The only pieces that haven't been are the North American area and the small bits of Asian area because, well, North America I haven't gotten to yet, and the Asian area is brand new. So, also I noticed in my walkthrough yesterday of this zoo that there's a few things that were not necessarily where I left them, and I'm not sure how that happened, but it did. But yeah, anyways, we've got the first habitat in the zoo is our hippo habitat, and a nice covered walkway to keep the guests cool when they're down here looking at the hippos. Uh, the idea was inspired by the San Diego Zoo, but obviously the implementation is very different. Uh, and that's okay. I do have an eventual plan to make a San Diego Zoo replica, and at that point I'll have the actual setup how I want it. I have no idea what that is. Anyway, the next habitat right across from that dining area is our okapis, and they moved a little closer to the zoo entrance, but they've also had a lot more plants put in, and they've gotten a nice pool of water to drink and swim in rather than the standard water fountain or bowl. Um, and then I also made them a custom shelter and staff entrance. Uh, so that's the okapis. Um, the hippo habitat is a recent modification as well. It used to not have this this lower viewing area, and this whole thing used to be just one big path rather than the two smaller ones. Um, and also, I think the hippo habitat came out a bit further as a partial result of that, but now I've moved it further back on the back end. Um, there used to originally be pygmy hippos right next to the hippos. That changed twice. uh, the pygmy hippos got moved back to another area of the zoo, which we will eventually see, and then they got moved to their current location. In their place, I originally had, where that pool at the front of the zoo is, I originally had my aardvarks, and then I moved the aardvarks back here to get them a little further away from the entrance. They were a little happier, but it was still a very crowded area, so I moved them again when I did the next remodel of this area. Um, and I think that the current setup is much better. We've got our bonobos down here, and as you can see, they've got a decent amount of area up at the front, but it also expands in the back quite a bit. Our Nyala were right there, or actually right here at this edge of the, right before that path goes up. But now they've been moved over here, and instead of having just a standard box habitat, they have a slightly different box habitat with a ditch to keep them from getting out. uh, but they also have a lot more plants, and I think they've got a bit more. Yeah, they've got a bit more space because I only ever had the space for two adults at the time of that original habitat, and now they've got enough for I think five of them. Um, Also, I used to have an animal talk here for the hippos, but due to the changing nature of the zoo, they don't have that spot anymore. Um, Moving along from here, we have our second dining area and another spot just to look at the hippos through. I really don't know what happened to the information panels. They should work. There's power and everything, so yeah, I don't know. We also have the lions and their second habitat here, right next to the dining area, so you can eat with the lions if you like. The lions have a view pretty much all around their habitat, and you can also see the monorail station right up there. That station did not used to be there. That used to be where the bongos were. But obviously the bongos have been moved now. Uh, so we'll come out here. We'll have a brief encounter with our elephants and giraffes. We'll come back to them in a minute or so. But our lions are here. The edge of our African habitats, I should say, is here with our spotted hyenas, and they're fairly large enclosure. It's also a much better enclosure than they used to have. So we've got our lions around here. We used to have our bonobos here, but as you saw, they got moved, and the lions came down here to have a new habitat. Past this, we get into the start of what is now the North American habitats, but it used to be the beginning of. Oh, but it used to be a gorilla habitat. We'll get to that part later. I want to finish Africa first. So, now going back to our elephants and giraffes. The elephants are feeling a bit loud today. It used to be this area here has been changed significantly as well. The hyenas are where there used to be lemurs, and then the elephant habitat started around here, probably, yeah, roughly about here, and expanded this way. And then I used to have a covered walkway that would go essentially into the middle of the habitat with fences along the sides, of course, to keep the guests safe. Um, it was a pretty nice habitat, but I think this one is better. It lowers them down into the ground a bit further, and then you can see, so you can get better views. And at this level, you're also about head level with the giraffes, which is a nice treat rather than having them tower above you all the time. Uh, I used to have some African exhibit species here, but that's changed as well. Over here we have our little viewing area inside the shelter. This shelter is. I did put a fair amount of effort into the shelter and the beams, just to keep the upper structure nice. Although, admittedly, the outside of the building is a little bland. Uh, the elephants and giraffes habitat does extend quite a ways along here now. and they've got a nice big pool. Um, the pool was a lot smaller in the previous habitat, and it was also over where the shelter is now, so that's a pretty big change for them. We used to have our spotted hyenas here, and our lions were actually where the pool is now. Um, so that's a pretty big change. And then the edge of that habitat back there, you see, is where our chimpanzees used to be. We have three habitats over here that are kind of the same as they always have been, and so those are the ones that I mentioned that kind of harken back to where I started out as a zoo builder. And that is our Nile monitor habitat, which has a ton of young, and then also a couple adults, I think three adults. Um, and our Gemsbach habitat is the second one. I believe I was in the market for more, but the Trade Center never had any for me to bring in. And then finally, the most important animal, of course, at least as far as I'm concerned, is the cheetah. And these guys also currently have an older habitat that they get to enjoy. It's not a bad habitat, it's just very sparse. Um, the original idea was I was going to remodel them as well by rotating this to be more along this length, but then the Nyala got there instead. So, and then I was originally this dining area up here was more here at this end of the bonobo habitat. So that change didn't work. So I couldn't at the time that I was planning it, I couldn't rotate them to this because that's where the habitat of the dining area was. Um, but this dining area has been moved a little bit, and we've got these nice baobabs to serve as shade trees for the dining area. Um, and this is another area that's kind of an eat with the animals style thing where you can eat up here, and you've got a view of the African wild dogs. The wild dog habitat was. That's right. The African wild dog habitat is pretty close to where it originally was, except that it came out to about here along the. Well, actually, no, it came out to this path here because this path continued all the way along until it connected up there. I raised this path, I forgot, but I raised this path up a bit earlier now. This here is where it actually originally raised up. The wild dogs used to be here, and then they were under the path and they ended here. But that has now changed, and they are now all on one side of the path. And I gotta say, I do enjoy them being on this side of the path, on the one side of the path, and I like how I like the habitat a lot better now than the old one. Also, I don't have any problems with escaped animals that are still in their habitats. That was a problem in the last version. Um, moving along, we will go up that path later. Uh, but instead of going up that path, we're going to take a look down here at our gorillas. The gorilla habitat is the old version had a moat between the first version. There's been three versions of the gorilla habitat. The first version had a moat and a raised walkway that you could go and get a bit closer to the gorillas with. Um, the second version is now another habitat, and I'll show you that later on. And the third version is this here, where we've got this nice, pretty thoroughly jungled, but still easily viewable area, so you can so you can get a good look at them as a customer, guest. That's the word I was looking for originally. Um, And, they've got some hills just to break up the elevation a bit. And a lot of climbing enrichments and others around for them. We've also got our mandrills right across from them, and they do have a moat that is just big enough to keep them contained. And then across the way from them, well, rather through the rock wall, we've got where we moved our aardvarks to, and they're much happier here because it doesn't get quite as busy here as it did in the front of the zoo. Um, and then across from them, we have our chimps. And our chimps used to have a long habitat that was just on the ground level with a tall fence. Well, actually, it was a brick wall, if I recall, with some windows in it. But now they've got this lovely little area, and they seem happier overall. Moving on along, we're going to skip over that Asian section for now. We'll come back to it at the end, which means we're also going to skip that habitat. We have over on this side of the zoo. Apologies, I realize I'm moving the camera a lot faster than I usually do. So if any of you get motion sick, I do apologize. I'm not sure why I'm moving it so much faster. I'll try to kind of slow it down a bit, at least on the turns. Over here we have our new bongo habitat, which is kind of, I wanted to seclude it a little bit from the main pathway, and so we have this area. And I kind of like the shaded area here just to view the bongos in. They also have a nice pool that they'll sometimes go swimming in, which is kind of nice to see. But yeah, so there's their habitat mostly secluded from the main path, except for this one window here. Across from them, we have the new spot for the Aldabra giant tortoises. And they like it here better than they did at the front of the zoo, too. um, it's still pretty close to the front, but they're much happier where they are now and less stressed. Over here we have our greater flamingos. And they've had 3 iterations of their habitat too. There was the first one, which was basically just one big square habitat with a pool towards the back. And, well, actually, no, it was towards the center of the habitat. There was a second one where the pool moved into the back, but I had a guest entrance, so the guests could come in and walk with the flamingos. But unfortunately, the flamingos got really stressed out with that. So when it came time to remodel their habitat, I went ahead and moved them over here. And as you can see, they're all hungry, so they're getting some food. Now, apparently it's dinner time for them. So we'll go ahead and move on. The pygmy hippos have their third habitat over here. And I gotta say, this is probably one of the habitats I'm the most happy with in the zoo. We have, just that nice waterfall from the pool over here with some mist in the water. And we've got all the, we've got the shelter there, we've got the entrance to the habitat kind of secluded behind those rocks a bit. And just a lot of nice foliage for them to mess around with and hide behind if they want. I guess that makes it time to go to the Great African Savanna. The original idea for the Great African Savanna, which we're now heading for uh, via the lemurs, is that it was supposed to be the center of the zoo and one massive habitat. Uh, and then the guests were supposed to be in the middle of the savannah. That didn't, no, the massive habitat part didn't work out quite how I'd planned it. Because I have 8 species in there, and this is one of the examples of things not being where I left them. I had 8 species in there, and the 8 different species were too much for the staff to keep up with. So I had to split it into 4 different habitats, and that's kind of disappointing to me, at least. But they've got 4 habitats, and the general shape of it is all still the same, except I also changed the guest area with a major remodel. Um, anyway, here we are down here with the lemurs. We've got a nice hidden viewing area. They can't see the guests, but the guests can see them. And they've also got a nice little cave to hide in for their shelter here. We've got both ring-tailed lemurs and red ruff lemurs in here. And then we have a upper viewing area, which isn't as big as I would like, but the lemurs were getting stressed, so I needed to move the trees a little bit to kind of provide them with a bit more cover. So, yeah, now they're pretty happy down here. And now we enter the Great African Savanna. Um, the Great African Savanna is a pretty massive area, to be honest. Um, we have all of this land out here. We've got our African buffaloes in here somewhere. There's one. There's 2, as well as our springbok. So this is the first habitat. We also have a magical wind turbine that spins right through the terrain. uh, yeah, so our springbok and our buffalo are out here. Um, moving along the path, we come to the, I believe, wildebeest. Yep, the wildebeest and our warthogs. And that Pumbaa down there is being a little rude, keeping all of our safari jeeps at a standstill. And that's actually why I will not be doing a tour on the jeeps, but we'll go ahead and take a ride on the monorail later on. So, yeah, they've got plenty of space in here. Next up, we have our ostriches and our sable antelopes. Pretty massive habitat for them as well. Like I said, originally the idea was for this all to be one habitat, but it just didn't work out, unfortunately. And it was very disappointing to see that not work, but at least now things are working how they were meant to. Then finally we have over here our Thompson's gazelles and our zebras. Oh, there we go. There's our zebras. But we also have the entrance and exit for that for the jeeps. And the reason the jeeps are raised up, especially over here, is that that's where the hyenas originally had their habitat. So, in order to get them back to the station without moving the station and without putting the guests in harm's way with the jeep or with the hyenas. I had to raise it up over them. That's probably something I will go back and fix later on, but I just haven't done it yet. Um, Before we go back to the savannah, let's go ahead and check out our tiny little start of a South American area that will probably be moved. Um, there was a franchise challenge going, and so I went ahead and put in some Baird's tapers down here, and they've got a nice, it's a nice small habitat, but I like it anyway. Yeah, so that's we'll get this will not be staying here. It will definitely be moving later on, but we'll get to that later. Um, Up here we have another major change that came to the zoo. Originally up here, this was all the paths branching from, no, all these main paths were still here, but originally this main path here continued straight through to the other side. And then instead of having these smaller branching paths, we had two, just one on each side, and a bit of a circular pattern. And then our dining area was right through the middle here. Now our dining area is still here, it's just along the edges of this, it's just along the edges of the reptile house. The reptile house area is probably the most symmetrical build I've ever done. It had a slight influence of the San Diego Zoo's reptile house, but it's quite a bit taller than the San Diego Zoo's reptile house. And it has different plants on the edges. So there is that to note. But overall, it does have the staff area in the center. um, and that provides easy access for most of the exhibits. The only two that the keepers can't, or the only ones the keepers can't get to are these corner ones. So I went ahead and put them in a separate group, so our Great African Savannah folks can take care of them. But yeah, we've got that nice roofing, the arches. I think the arches are actually something that appears in our in the San Diego Zoo, but I can't remember, to be honest. It's been so long since I've been there, unfortunately. Oh, we've got some space for the scarabs, by the way, that are in the upcoming DLC. But yeah, so this is the interior of the habitat, or of the reptile house. And now it's time to go ahead and go to North America. Oh, look, more stuff that's not where I left it. I don't know what happened with some of these things, to be honest, because they're definitely not where I left them. But at least we get to laugh at it now. Um, but yeah. So, moving along to North America. Oh, hey, it's raining. Gonna go ahead and fix that real quick, because I don't feel like viewing the zoo in the rain. Oh, that key, not F, G. Let's see here. I'll also just set it to a constant time. And get rid of our interface again. Alright, so moving along here. This here used to be so this entire pool area used to be the chimpanzee habitat, and it used to be ground level rather than sunken in. But I like it better as it is now. Um, and I like that we're, actively reusing the water that the giraffes and elephants have. Though, we're having to cool the water down quite a bit down here. This is our polar bear habitat. This is the second incarnation of the polar bear habitat. I'll show you the first one later. Well, I'll show you the first area later. Um, but they've got a nice big pool down here to go to play in. And then we have essentially everything from about here on this wall down to here was where the chimpanzees were, and then everything else is where the old gorilla habitat used to be. And that was the second incarnation of the gorillas. The first incarnation was in the same area, but we used to have some hills here. I used to have some massive climbing structures that would go over the guest dining area. Unfortunately, the gorillas never used those climbing areas, so they could get from one side to the other of their habitats. But why are you not on the ground? That's another one. Okay. Don't worry, there's at least one more of these cameras that's just not on the ground properly in the zoo, and I know that because the monorail goes right through it, and that's not where I left them. But we've got our nice little, one of the nice North America dining areas here at our polar bear habitat, and if they don't feel like being watched, then they can go under here, like the gorillas used to. Um, but yeah, so that's our polar bear habitat. This used to be the last exhibit on the Africa side, and you can see we've changed paths. We change paths when we leave Africa and go to North America. Um, I never did actually get around to putting in railings along here with the polar bears, but that's something to do once I have the VRAM for it. Um, and I was having trouble with the pathing here, as you can see, very obviously. This whole side here used to be African themed stuff, but I changed it over to the North American. But I liked originally the contrast between the African side and the North American side. Um, and speaking of North American animals, we've got our first ones here. These are our reindeer. And then next to the reindeer, we have the Dall sheep. These habitats are probably all going to change. I just really don't want to. And I really don't want to, not because of the habitats, but because of something that you'll see a little later in the zoo. Um, we have our American bison here. I'm going to be a terrible person and tell you all a very bad joke. Um, what did the bison say, or what did the buffalo say to their children when they were going off to school? Bye, son. I'll see myself out now. Next to the bison, we have our Arctic wolves in a nice sunken habitat. And also my first time really playing around with those with those snow rocks. And I think it works out nicely down here with those. And we've got a nice bit of moss growing on some, the caribou moss, uh, and some snow around them. Works out nicely, I think. Up here we have the transition to the start of that South America area. Like I said, that's going to move. Because if I end up, when I end up coming back, ultimately I'm going to move a lot of the North America stuff up here. Because the South America stuff is going to go out where the paths originally led. There was a path out to here, well, coming from the South America area. There was a path originally going out here, as you can see by the lack of tall grass, and there was a habitat here. This habitat, now this dining area actually used to be where the second pygmy hippo habitat was. And that's changed a lot, as you can see. There are obviously no more pygmy hippos in there. The original polar bear habitat was out here. And I had a pathway going along this edge and then around that. Their water area was, their pool was here. It's gone now, obviously. And then I also had a path going across. And I did not have this building here. But I did have a little area that you could walk down and come out and be above the polar bears over here as well. This area here is now the next plan for this area is for it to be kind of like an Amazon River basin. And I do think I could actually fit all of the South American animals in there, aside from the exhibit species, which are already in their place. And so that's part of the plan, is to do that. I have a very admittedly rudimentary habitat here for the seals. Though to be fair, this was the first seal habitat. Oh, this is the first aquatic habitat that I'd ever built. That's also our, of course, North American entrance for the monorail. I do plan to eventually have stops for the monorail in all the continents, but for now I just have the North American and the African stops. Alright, one thing that I am pretty pleased with, granted I could go back in and do some walling down here as well, but at the time at least, to quote another YouTuber, Flavaliki, I just couldn't be bothered. But we have our underwater viewing area for the seals, where the guests can come and see the seals swimming. Ah, there's one. Sweet. Perfect. Yeah, so that's the seals and their swimming area. Again, yes, I know I could come and do some walls, and if I ever come back, I might, or I might not. And if I don't, then it will be because I'm moving the seals anyway. So I might as well just make the new place look better rather than worry about the old one. Over here we have our timber wolves. I'm pretty proud of this habitat, though I could do some more work in here. But yeah, so this is the timber wolves habitat. It's a nice, pretty big area. They've also got a little cave-like thing to hide under. I know I should do some more rock work, but again, they might be moving if I when I end up coming back to this zoo, because I will eventually have a better graphics card that can handle a bigger zoo. But yeah, so that's their habitat. They've got a nice wide area to run around in. We've got our pronghorned antelopes over here. We've got 2 viewing areas for them. Just small windows so they can be seen. They actually used to have another area in the zoo. They were over actually where the pygmy hippos are now. But that was not a intentional thing. I saw antelope and assumed they were African. And then later on, I realized, oh, hey, these are North American animals. I should move them when I have a chance. This area here is another dining area, and it's also the reason I don't want to that I don't actually want to move the North American animals. I just know that I'm going to need to at some point. Uh, I put a lot of effort into this little dining area here, and I like the look and feel of it, and I don't necessarily want to change that. We've got a nice pond over here to sit by. At the edge of the zoo, we've got a nice glass roof and a nice view of the grizzly bears from nearby. Part of the reason, though, that I need to move all of this stuff is that even with the stop in North America for the monorail, guests don't come out here all that often. So, as much as I want to keep this area as it is, I also don't want to keep this area as it is, just because of the fact that the guests don't ever make it out here. Next up, we'll go ahead and head over to the Asian area of the zoo. Which is new and just starting out. And then finally, we'll finish up this tour with a ride on the monorail. But let's see, what do we have? Here's our pygmy hippos, which means we need to go this way. Here we go. Right, I only have 3 Asian animals in the zoo other than habitat or exhibit species. We've got our Bengal tigers, and they've got a nice river running into a pool down here. That water shouldn't be dirty. There should be something to keep that water clean. It probably is just colored that way. But yeah, so our Bengal tigers. It's been like a month or two since I've actually thoroughly gone through this zoo, so I may not remember all the details, like having cleaned. Oh, hey, he's using it. Sweet. I don't think I've ever seen an animal use the scratching post trees before that. Yeah. So we've got our Bengal tigers here, and then next to them we have the most ridiculous staff paths that we've ever seen. Actually, it's guest paths, but so this is our Indian peafowl, and I say it's ridiculous for the staff because the trade center for the zoo is over there by the monorail. When the staff would come to put the Indian peafowl into their habitat, they came out up along the path, along the main path, out through here, up to here, and you would think that they could just come to here and let the animals out in the exhibit, right? Nope. The people transporting the animals ran all along this path here, all the way out through there, up here into the staff path, turned around, got over to here, and finally let the animals out. It was ridiculous. But that being said, this is one of the habitats that I enjoy a lot. We've got a nice little seating area to learn about the peacocks and see them as you are just sitting in their habitat. And it's also the one where, since I was finally working on Asian habitats, I got to use the cherry blossom trees. And I guess I could have used them elsewhere, but I was trying to keep the theming consistent with the continent. So that's what we did. So that's where we ended up. Was we finally have cherry blossoms for the first time in this habitat here. We've also got some wisteria uh, and some other plants that we haven't seen before in the zoo. Um, and then finally we have our Indian elephants. And the Indian elephants are a fun habitat as well. Um, we've got all of their enrichment stuff is close to a path, but not necessarily this front path, as you might have guessed. Their habitat is this whole thing, and guests are disgusting and annoying with all this litter. But we've got our Indian elephants habitat has, of course, more cherry blossoms because I could. And we get to come all the way over to here and just walk through the habitat with just enough of a steep incline on either side of the path to where the elephants can't get to the guests. And then they're, instead of building a shelter, like a traditional shelter, I built them this area down here where they can get up and down and to either side of the habitat, including their water. So, yeah, this is the Asian elephant habitat. This is the last of the exhibit species. Are meant to go up there, not down. Eventual plans for this area include the Jeep Safari will have an exit over to here, and then there will be some more Asian animals in this area here. Um, that was part of the original idea behind the Great African Savanna, would be that as guests you would get to see the entire zoo from that central area. And obviously that plan has changed. I don't even think there's enough animals to fill up the outside area left in the zoo. And that's part of the reason I would need to move North America up here, and maybe even move that South American basin over here in the future. But that won't happen just yet. So let's go ahead and get our ride on the monorail. And then we'll call it a day. Let's start at the right place. Well, something was loud. Perfect. Perfect timing. We'll get in. I have to hold the mouse if we want to do that one, so we'll go ahead and do this version. We have that first incline to go up and over those trees because I didn't want to go around them. And then we get a nice view of the hippos from here. Then we kind of go through the trees separating the two paths and get a nice overhead view of our okapis. Is this set to a higher speed, or am I just silly? I think it's just I'm silly. From the okapis we go over the bongos as well, before turning and going over the aardvark habitat. And then crossing over to the chimps and the gorillas. We do get a little closer to the chimps, uh, at least as close as we can without them climbing on board the monorail, because that would be bad. Pretty sure they're not supposed to climb onto the monorail, so I don't necessarily want them to. Then we go over the gorillas, and same story, as close as we can be without them climbing aboard. Nice view of them as they play around in their habitat. Then we start climbing up. And we go over the path into the great African savanna, and we get to see our wild dogs from another perspective. Kind of from above, like Planet Zoo. Not Planet Zoo. This is Planet Zoo. Planet Earth. There we go. Then finally we turn in towards the Gemsbach. We get another perspective on them, as well as the cheetahs. And then this is coming up. One of my favorite parts of this particular area is going down to head level with the giraffes in the elephant and giraffe habitat. And I think it works out rather nicely. And then we start climbing again to get out of the habitat. I didn't realize that tree goes right through the monorail. I'll have to move that later. There's a lot of things I gotta change now that I'm seeing them, and now that some things aren't where I left them. Though I think that, to be fair, I think that tree is where I left it. Then you come out over here, you get to see them playing if they're in the water, and then you go out to see the polar bears if they're in the water. Then you kind of have to dive through the trees a little bit, as I was having trouble placing it at the same altitude. So you have to dive through the trees to enter the Arctic wolf habitat. And then, guess what? It's too low here to go over that spot. It literally wouldn't let me place it. So you have to climb up a bit to get out of the Arctic wolves. And finally, the next stop is right up here. Huh, some of that roughen tool made some interesting results down there. Let's see if we can't get ourselves ahead to another train rather than waiting this whole time. Cool. We'll wait for this one to leave. It shouldn't be too long. Probably like, I think I have it set to about 30 seconds. But yeah, so we've got we've got another one coming in behind us anyway. Yep, we're leaving now. Alright, so this will have a nice view of the African savanna. Not the African savanna, the South American Amazon River Basin later. We get to go up and over the seals. And I have no idea why they're all moving in the same direction when at this point, but hey, whatever floats their boat. Get a nice view of the timber wolves in their habitat. This is probably the only way for the guests to see the backstage areas here too. is with this monorail, and even then it's just a fairly sparse area. I should probably put some foliage in the way, but I haven't done that yet. We do have another tree that we go right through, and that one is where I left it. With regards to the grizzly bears, but we get to see the grizzly bears, so who cares if the tree is smacking us in the face, right? And then finally, the monorail comes back around and turns towards Africa. We get to see we do get a view of the reindeer from here, and then we climb. No, we don't climb yet. We go over. This actually is new, I think. I don't think I had this monorail in here with the gorillas. So we go through the polar bear habitat more recently, and I don't think the monorail ever actually existed when the gorillas were here. Then we start to climb once we hit the. We start a slow climb once we hit the spotted hyenas. Just to get ourselves up a little higher so that we can get into the station up there. So we go up over the spotted hyenas, up past the lions. And I think I auto-completed this, which is why it then has that drop there. So that's something I would probably want to change later on. But yeah, so that is our monorail ride. We're not going to go on the safari jeeps because they get stopped all the time by different animals. But yeah, so this is the first zoo. Eventually, I do want to have all the animals in the game in here. But I do know that that's going to take quite a while before I can do that. But yeah, anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this tour, and I'll catch you in the next episode, which will probably be career mode, since it's taking a while to terraform. But yeah, with that being said, have a good one. Anarian out.